The morning they released me from Grand Valley Institution, it was still dark outside. I remember standing at the gate with a plastic bag in one hand and a cheque from Correctional Service Canada in the other. $2,847.50. That's what 6 years of my life came out to. The guard who processed my release didn't look at me once. He slid the envelope through the slot, buzzed the door, and went back to his coffee. That was it. After 6 years, that was all there was. I was 61 years old. I had gone in at 55, still with dark hair and a straight back. I came out grey, a little stooped, and with a tremor in my left hand that the prison doctor said was stress-related and would probably pass. It hasn't. My name is Vera, and 6 years ago I was convicted of poisoning my stepson. His name was Brandon, my husband's son from his first marriage. He was 28 when he died, and I had known him since he was 14. I was not his mother, and I never pretended to be, but I cooked for him when he came home for Christmas. I drove him to his medical appointments when my husband was travelling for work. When he got sick, truly sick, the kind of sick that settles in and doesn't leave, I was the one sitting beside his hospital bed at 3 a.m, holding his hand while the monitors beat. And then he died, and somehow I was the one who killed him. The prosecution's theory was neat and cruel in equal measure. They said I had been slowly introducing arsenic into Brandon's food over several months, hoping to inherit through my husband's estate once the son was out of the picture. They had a toxicology report. They had a neighbour who said she'd seen me purchasing unusual supplements online. They had a Crown attorney who was very good at his job and a defence lawyer who, I later learned, had been managing a gambling problem that was consuming most of his attention. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Guilty. My husband, Leonard. He believed them. That's the part that took the longest to get over. Not the prison itself. Not the loss of my home or my friends or my garden that I'd spent 15 years building. It was Leonard sitting in that courtroom, not looking at me when they read the verdict. He had already decided. Maybe he'd decided before the trial even began. I served 6 years at Grand Valley. I worked in the institution's administrative office, filing paperwork, updating records. I saved every dollar from my prison pay, $9.90 a day, which sounds like nothing because it is nothing, and whatever small amount my sister sent me at Christmas and on my birthday. By the time I walked out, I had $4,200 between the cheque and my savings. I knew exactly where every cent of it was going and what it had to last for. I told myself that before I did anything else, before I looked for a room to rent, before I called my sister, before I figured out what came next. There was one thing I had to do. I had to visit the care home where my mother-in-law lived. Her name was Edwina. She was 83 years old and she had been living at Cedarbrook Long-Term Care in Burlington for the past 4 years. She had advanced dementia, the kind that comes and goes like weather, clear 1 hour and completely fogged the next. Leonard had stopped visiting her after the first year. He said it was too hard that she didn't know him anymore. I suspected it was because she still called him by his name and asked him questions he didn't want to answer. Edwina had always liked me. Before the dementia really took hold, she used to call me on Sunday evenings just to talk. She sent me cards, actual paper cards, on my birthday and at Easter. When I was arrested, she was the only person on Leonard's side of the family who said publicly that she didn't believe it. I heard that through my sister. By then, Edwina's mind was already starting to slip, and I don't know how much of what she said was remembered afterward or taken seriously. I went to Cedarbrook on the bus. It was a Tuesday in late October, one of those flat, grey Canadian days where the sky looks like concrete and the leaves have all come down and everything smells faintly of wood smoke and cold earth. I had a small bunch of grocery store chrysanthemums in my lap, white, because Edwina had always liked white flowers, and I was wearing the same coat I'd been arrested in, which still fit but felt like wearing someone else's skin. The care home was a low brick building set back from the road with a parking lot and a small garden that I imagined was pleasant in summer. The woman at the front desk checked my name against a list, looked at me for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then smiled and said, Edwina was in the sunroom. The sunroom was at the end of a long corridor that smelled of floor cleaner and something institutional underneath it, cooked vegetables, disinfectant, the particular warmth of too many bodies in a heated space. There were perhaps a dozen residents in there, some asleep in their chairs, some watching a nature program on the television, mounted in the corner. Edwina was sitting by the window with a blanket across her knees, looking out at the garden. She looked smaller than I remembered, frailer, but when I came around to where she could see me, something shifted in her face. Vera, she said, not a question, a statement. I sat down in the chair beside her and put the flowers in her lap, and she touched the petals with one finger very gently. I heard they let you out, she said. Last week, I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands moved on the blanket, smoothing it down. I wanted to write to you, she said finally. I didn't know if the letters would reach you. It's all right. It isn't. She turned to look at me properly. Her eyes were very clear that afternoon, clearer than I had expected. There are things I should have said, things I knew. My heart did something I can't quite describe. Not a lurch, exactly, more like a settling, as though some part of me had been braced for a long time and had just, very carefully, let go. What things? I asked. She looked back out the window. A bird was moving along the garden path, a sparrow or something like it, small and quick against the grey stones. Brandon's medication, she said. I saw something. I kept my voice very level. Tell me. She told me in the way dementia tells things, not in a straight line, not with clean edges. She circled around it and came back and lost the thread and found it again. But I am a patient person. 6 years of incarceration will do that to you, if nothing else. This is what she told me. About 8 months before Brandon died, Edwina had been staying with Leonard and me for 2 weeks while her apartment building underwent some repairs. She had been sleeping in the downstairs guest room. Brandon had come to visit for a weekend that happened to fall during her stay. On the Saturday night, very late, past midnight, she had gotten up to use the bathroom and had passed the kitchen on her way back. The light was on. She stopped because she thought it might be me or Leonard, and she didn't want to startle anyone. It wasn't me or Leonard. It was Brandon's girlfriend, Serena. Edwina said she was standing at the kitchen counter with Brandon's weekend pill organizer open in front of her. She was adding something to it, a white powder, something from a small Ziploc bag she brought with her. Edwina said she stood in the hallway and watched, and then went back to her room because, in her telling, she didn't want to interfere. She thought perhaps it was some kind of supplement, something Brandon had asked Serena to bring. She thought there was a reasonable explanation. She didn't think about it again until Brandon died and I was arrested. By then, the dementia had already started to blur things, and she couldn't always trust her own memory, and Leonard had assured her that the courts had handled it properly. So she stayed quiet. And then she got worse. And then she came to Cedarbrook. And she had been carrying it around ever since, in whatever part of her mind still held on to things. I sat with her for 3 hours that afternoon. I asked her everything I could think of what Serena had looked like, whether there had been any conversation, whether she'd told anyone at the time. The answers came slowly in fragments, but the core of it stayed consistent every time she circled back. She had seen Serena adding something to Brandon's medication. She was sure of it. She had always been sure. Serena. I knew Serena, of course. She and Brandon had been together for almost 4 years by the time he died. She was 10 years younger than him, a confident, pretty woman who worked in pharmaceutical sales and had, now that I thought about it, access to a very great number of substances. She had wept beautifully at Brandon's funeral. She had testified at my trial briefly, only to confirm a few timeline details. The Crown had not leaned on her testimony heavily because they didn't need to. They already had everything they needed to put me away. After the arrest, Leonard had told me once, I think without meaning to be cruel, I think he genuinely didn't see it, that Serena had been very supportive, that she was helping him through a difficult time. I drove back to Burlington on the bus and sat in a Tim Hortons for 2 hours with a medium double-double going cold in front of me, trying to think clearly. The first thing I needed was information. I needed to know where Serena was now, what she was doing, whether she had stayed in Leonard's life after my conviction. I needed to know if there was any evidence beyond the word of an 83-year-old woman with advanced dementia, which I already knew, even then, would not be enough on its own. I needed to know whether anyone had ever actually looked at Serena, or whether the police and the Crown had found me and stopped looking. I had no one to help me with this except my sister. She had moved to Kitchener after I went to prison, partly to get away from the gossip, partly to be closer to me while I was at Grand Valley. She was 64, widowed, with a pension from Ontario Hydro and a bungalow she kept immaculate. Her name was Rosalind, and she was the only person who had written to me consistently all 6 years without once asking me to explain myself or account for any detail of what had happened. I called her from the Tim Hortons. "I know you're going to tell me to let it go," I said. "I was going to say nothing of the sort," she said. "Tell me everything." I told her. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her best qualities. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Serena still lives in Hamilton. She's with Leonard." I put the cup down very carefully. "Since when?" "About 8 months after your conviction." I had suspected it. Somewhere I had always suspected it, but hearing it said plainly was still a different thing from suspecting it. "All right," I said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to do something." I stayed with Rosalind for the first 2 weeks after my release, sleeping in her spare room with its yellow curtains and its smell of cedar chips. I spent those 2 weeks doing research. Rosalind had a laptop and a reliable internet connection, and the patience to sit with me in the evenings while I worked through public records, news archives, anything I could find. What I found was this. In the months before Brandon died, he had updated his life insurance policy. The total value was $400,000, a significant amount for a 28-year-old, but not extraordinary. The named beneficiary had been changed from his father to Serena 6 months before his death. I found this through a probate filing in the Ontario Court Records database because the policy had been contested, briefly, by Leonard after the conviction, and then the contest had been dropped. I couldn't find out why the contest had been dropped. That bothered me. I also found that Serena, after Brandon's death, had quit pharmaceutical sales and started a small investment consultancy. I couldn't find evidence of any particular inheritance or windfall in the public record, but the business had appeared very quickly and seemed, from the outside, to be doing well. What I could not find, what I needed, was anything that could actually be used. Evidence. Something a lawyer could take to the Criminal Conviction Review Group and use to trigger a Section 696 application for ministerial review, because that was the path. I had looked it up in the prison library years before, when I still had enough energy to plan, before the energy ran out and I went into the grey maintenance mode of just getting through the days. The Section 696 process is long and difficult, and there are no guarantees, but it is the path, and it requires new evidence, something that wasn't available at trial. The word of an elderly woman with dementia, I knew, was not going to be enough on its own. I needed to talk to someone who knew what Serena had actually had access to, who knew whether the substance Edwina saw her adding to the medication could have come from her professional contacts, who might have seen or heard something in those pharmaceutical circles. My instinct was to go looking for her former colleagues, but I didn't know how to do that without alerting anyone to what I was doing. And I had a strong, bone-deep sense that if Serena knew I was looking, things would get complicated quickly. It was Rosalind who suggested the support group. "There's a wrongful conviction support network," she said one evening, handing me a printout she'd found through the Association in Defence of the Wrongly Convicted. "They have volunteers. Some of them are lawyers. Some are just people who've been through it and know how the process works." I called the number on the printout. The woman who answered, a retired nurse named Phyllis who had spent 15 years volunteering with the group after her nephew's wrongful conviction, was the first person outside of my sister who listened to my story from beginning to end without any visible skepticism settling into their face. "You'll need someone who can look into the insurance policy more deeply," Phyllis said. "And you'll need a doctor to look at the toxicology report from the trial. Arsenic poisoning has a very specific presentation. There are questions I'd want to ask about that report that I doubt your original defence lawyer thought to ask." She connected me with a retired forensic pathologist named Dr. Sutherland, who did occasional pro bono review work for the group. He agreed to look at the trial records. It took him 10 days. When he called me at Rosalind's number, he spoke for 45 minutes. By the end of it, my hand was shaking, both hands, not just the left. The toxicology report from Brandon's death was not wrong, exactly. The arsenic levels in his hair and tissue samples were real, but Dr. Sutherland had identified several things that had never been brought up at trial. The pattern of accumulation was unusual. It suggested intermittent exposure, not continuous. It was inconsistent with someone poisoning food, because food poisoning of this kind tends to produce a more consistent pattern. It was more consistent with something being added to medication, something taken on a regular but not daily schedule. More importantly, the type of arsenic compound detected was not commonly available in consumer products. It was a compound used in certain pharmaceutical and agricultural contexts. It was Dr. Starkter. Sutherland said carefully, the kind of thing that someone in pharmaceutical distribution might conceivably have access to. He agreed to write a formal report. Meanwhile, Phyllis had connected me with a woman named Daphne, a retired RCMP officer who now did private investigative work. Daphne was brisk and businesslike and charged a flat daily rate that I could barely afford, but decided was non-negotiable. "Tell me about the girlfriend," she said when we sat down in her office in Mississauga. "Everything." I told her everything I knew. Daphne spent 3 weeks working. She was not dramatic about it. She called me every few days with brief updates in the tone of someone reporting on a plumbing job. She was looking at Serena's professional history, her supplier contacts from her pharmaceutical sales years, whether anyone in the industry remembered anything unusual. She was looking at Leonard's finances and the dropped contest of the insurance policy. The call I had been waiting for came on a Thursday afternoon in late November. "Sit down," Daphne said. I was already sitting. I'd been sitting by Rosalind's phone for an hour. "The insurance contest was dropped because Leonard was paid," she said. "Not from the policy, a separate transaction. He received $80,000 in the 4 months after your conviction in 3 installments into an account I had to work reasonably hard to find. It came from a numbered company registered in Ontario. The numbered company is owned by a holding entity. That holding entity has Serena's mother's name on the paperwork." The room went very quiet. "She paid Leonard to drop the contest," I said. "That's what it looks like. And he took it." Daphne was quiet for a moment. "It looks that way. My husband had watched me be convicted of murder. He had watched me be taken away in handcuffs, and then he had taken $80,000 to remove himself as an obstacle to the woman who had actually done it, inheriting from his dead son." I sat with that for a long time. I don't have the words for what it felt like. I'm not sure there are words. There is a kind of betrayal that lives below the level where words can reach it. But I had things to do. and I had learned in 6 years to keep moving. The next morning, I called Phyllis and told her what Daphne had found. She connected me immediately with a lawyer named Ms. Okafor, who worked with the clinic at Osgood Hall Law School that handled wrongful conviction applications. Ms. Okafor was 30-something and precise, and had the manner of someone who has seen a great deal of injustice and has converted it entirely into forward motion. She reviewed everything in a week: Dr. Sutherland's report, Daphne's documentation, my count of Edwina's testimony, and the follow-up questions I'd been careful to write down in detail, the financial records. "This is enough to proceed," she said. "It's not a guarantee. The Section 696 process can take time, but the toxicology analysis alone is significant. It contradicts the Crown's theory in a material way that wasn't put before the jury. Combined with the financial transaction and your mother-in-law's account, we have a real application." "What about Edwina?" I asked. "Her dementia." "We can have her assessed by a specialist to speak to the consistency and reliability of her account on this specific memory. Dementia doesn't invalidate testimony. It requires careful handling. But her account has been consistent every time you've spoken with her. We document that." She paused. "I have to be honest with you. This will take time, probably more than a year, possibly 2. "I've already done 6, I said. She almost smiled. "Yes, I suppose you have." In the meantime, Daphne had located Serena's former supervisor from her pharmaceutical sales position, a man who had left the company 2 years earlier and now ran a small consulting firm outside of Guelph. His name was Terence. He agreed to meet with Daphne first, and then, after Daphne explained the situation in detail, agreed to speak with Miss Okafor. He had not gone to the police at the time of Brandon's death. He told Ms. Okafor in his statement that he hadn't known about the death until months later, when he'd seen my name in a news article, and by then he thought the matter had been handled through proper channels. What he knew was this: in the year before his departure from the company, Serena had signed out a testing sample of a specific compound, an arsenic-based agricultural tracer used in pesticide efficacy studies, and had never signed it back in. He had flagged it at the time as a paperwork issue. He had not connected it then to anything else. The compound matched what Dr. Sutherland had identified. That was the piece that locked it together. The formal application was submitted to the Minister of Justice in the spring. Miss Okafor had told me not to expect a quick response, and she was right. I spent that year working part-time at a legal aid clinic in Kitchener, filing, reception work, the kind of administrative tasks that come naturally after 6 years in a prison office. I was not supposed to do legal work exactly, but I could answer phones. I could help people fill out forms. I could sit across from someone who was lost in the system and explain, slowly and clearly, what each piece of paper meant and what happened next. I moved into a small apartment above a laundry in downtown Kitchener. I had a window that looked onto a parking lot and a gas station. In the evenings I read, or I went to Rosalind's for dinner, or I drove to Cedarbrook to sit with Edwina. Her good days were becoming fewer, but she always knew who I was. And every time I left, she squeezed my hand and said, "I'm glad I told you." "So am I always said, and I meant it every time. The ministerial review was completed 14 months after the application was submitted. The conclusion was a formal recommendation for a new trial. Ms. Okafor, who had remained carefully measured throughout the entire process, allowed herself a single moment of visible relief when she called me. "Don't celebrate yet," she said immediately. "The new trial?" "I know," I said. "I know." There was no new trial. Before the proceedings could be scheduled, Serena's legal counsel approached the Crown. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The legal negotiations were complex and lasted several more months, during which I was required to be available for consultation and documentation that I won't describe in detail here because I have been through it twice now and would rather not go through it a third time, even in memory. She received a sentence of 9 years. Leonard was charged separately with obstruction of justice for accepting the payment. His lawyer negotiated a conditional sentence, house arrest for 18 months, probation for 2 years. He will not serve a day in a federal institution. I will not pretend that felt like justice, but I was told, and I believe it to be true, that fighting for more would have taken another 2 years and might not have succeeded, and I was done spending years on Serena's account. The Ontario Court of Appeal entered a stay of my conviction in March. I stood in the courtroom, the same city, the same kind of fluorescent light overhead, and the judge read the order, and my conviction was gone, erased, as though it had never been. Except, of course, it had been. That part doesn't erase. The province of Ontario has a compensation process for wrongful convictions. My lawyer submitted the application, and I will not have the final outcome of that for some time yet. But there is a process. There is acknowledgement. That is more than there was before. I still visit Edwina every week. Her good days are fewer now. Some weeks she knows me and some weeks she doesn't. On the weeks she doesn't know me, I sit with her anyway and hold her hand and look out the window with her at the garden that is very pleasant in the spring, just as I imagined it would be. She doesn't need to know who I am for the company to mean something. I understand that now in a way I didn't before. One afternoon in early June, I arrived to find a young woman sitting with her in the sunroom, Edwina's granddaughter, visiting from out west. She was maybe 25, with her grandmother's eyes. She looked at me with polite uncertainty when I came in. "She talks about you," the granddaughter said. "She doesn't always remember your name, but she talks about someone she told the truth to. She says it was the most important thing she ever did." I sat down in my usual chair. Edwina's eyes were closed and her breathing was slow and even, and the afternoon light came through the window and fell across her hands on the blanket. "It was the most important thing anyone ever did for me," I said. "I still work at the legal aid clinic. I was offered a full position after the stay of conviction came through, and I took it. My hands are steadier than they were. Not completely steady, maybe never completely steady, but better. I know the phone extension for every judge's office in the Waterloo region. I know the names of all the intake lawyers and which ones come in early and which ones take their coffee black. I know how to listen to someone sitting across from me who is frightened and overwhelmed and doesn't know which end of a government form to start from. And I know how to stay calm and keep my voice even and tell them what comes next. There is no more important thing I have found than being someone who knows what comes next and is willing to sit across from a person who doesn't. Rosalind comes over on Sunday evenings. She brings one of those pre-made rotisserie chickens from the grocery store, and I make the vegetables, and we sit at my small kitchen table and eat and talk, and sometimes watch something on the television, and sometimes don't. It's the best part of my week, every week, without exception. I am 63 years old. I have a window that looks onto a gas station. I have a sister who believed me when no one else did, a lawyer who gave me back my name, an old woman in a care home who told the truth even when her own mind was uncertain, and a full-time job helping people find their way through systems that were not designed with them in mind. I don't have a garden anymore. I had a very good one once. Roses and heirloom tomatoes and a climbing hydrangea that took 10 years to really establish and was extraordinary by the end. I think about it sometimes, the hydrangea especially. I hope whoever lives in that house now knows what they have and doesn't cut it back too hard. Maybe I'll plant another one. You're supposed to plant them in spring when the ground is soft. I have a spring coming. I think about Edwina a lot, not just what she told me, though that changed the course of everything, but the fact that she held on to it for years. Her mind was slipping. She couldn't always remember what day it was or what she'd had for breakfast, but she held on to that one true thing and waited. There's something in that I still find difficult to put into words. People talk about honesty as though it's easy, as though telling the truth just means not lying when someone asks you a direct question. But what Edwina did was harder than that. She spoke up when it cost her something, when her own son might have turned away from her, when she couldn't even be certain her memory was reliable, when the easiest thing in the world would have been to let it go. That kind of honesty isn't a reflex. It's a choice you have to make again and again, even when you're frightened, even when your hands shake and your words come out in the wrong order. She made that choice, and because she did, I got my life back. I used to believe that if you were decent, if you kept your head down and treated people fairly and did the right thing when it was asked of you, that would be enough to protect you. It isn't, always. The world doesn't run on simple cause and effect, and goodness doesn't come with a guarantee. But I also know now that what you do with what happens to you is entirely yours. Serena made her choices, and they caught up with her, not because the universe arranged it neatly, but because Daphne was meticulous, because Dr. Marnie Sutherland looked carefully at a report everyone else had accepted without question, because Miss Okafor refused to look at my case and see anything less than a person deserving a real defence. Every link in that chain was a human being who decided to think clearly and act with care when it would have been simpler not to. That's the thing I try to carry into the clinic every day. When someone sits across from me with a file folder and a look on their face like they've already been defeated, I think, this is not a paperwork problem. This is a person. Look carefully. Ask the next question. Don't accept the first version of events just because it's the tidy one. In 6 years of wrongful imprisonment, the thing I came to understand, slowly, painfully, but completely, is that intelligence without integrity is just cleverness in service of the wrong ends, and integrity without the stubbornness to keep going is just good intentions that gave up too early. Rosamond never gave up. She wrote to me every week for 6 years. She didn't do it because she was certain I'd get out. She did it because she thought it was right. I don't have a better definition of character than that. I planted a hydrangea last May, a climbing one, against the side of the building. I had to get permission from the landlord, and it took 3 conversations, which felt, after everything else, like a very small bureaucratic hurdle. It's taken to the wall. I check on it most mornings before I leave for work. It hasn't bloomed yet, but it's going to. You can tell by the way the new growth comes in, full of intention, unhurried, entirely certain of itself. I think that's what survives in the end, not anger. Not even justice exactly, though I am grateful for it. What survives is the part of you that decided, somewhere in the middle of the worst of it, that you were going to keep going anyway. That part doesn't ask permission, it just grows.